What type of people did KGB look for?
They were looking for a certain set of traits that was not easy to find. Quickness of intellect, fast thinkers, fearlessness, the ability to operate in isolation. They were studying me for 18 months, and one of them one day showed up in my dorm room. I already figured in my mind, this is some kind of recruitment. He said, and can you imagine one day to work for the government? And I said, yeah, but not as a chemist. So he had an answer to the question he didn't ask. It was the adventure and the huge flattery that came with being invited to join the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet. The question was, can we smuggle him into the U.S. as a born American? Tradecraft training I got by the KGB was as good as it gets. There are spots when somebody follows you, and the people that follow you, you got to find spots where they have to come closer, like when you wait at a bus station. When you see the same face twice, you know that you're being followed. I became very successful. They knew that if I'm successful, they would have to bring me back. I was approached by an agent. I was waiting for a subway train, comes up to me and whispers in my ear, come home or else you're dead.
What do you think would happen if you went there, hypothetically speaking?
I would most likely fall out of a window. In my 8th year of operating in the United States, the medal was handed to my wife. Ironically, it came with $10,000.
The US dollars?
Yes. Instead of rubles, they gave me the currency of the country that we were trying to destroy because the rubles were worthless.
So what I want to say is,
I am very interested in your line of work. I've always been interested in just the psychology of different professions, and being a spy is definitely not something you see on a lot of people's resume. So you were a sleeper agent for the KGB. Now, just to explain for the audience, a sleeper agent is an agent that remains dormant within the society until activated to carry out a mission. So there can be a long-term inactivity. Sleeper agents can live so-called normal lives for years. So you have to blend into the community and then not engage in the espionage until you receive certain orders. So you create credible cover identity, you secure a legitimate job, you build networks or relationships, and KGB was notorious for the use of sleeper agents.
I was a sleeper, but they didn't tell me that I was supposed to be a sleeper. A sleeper eventually would get instructions as to what to do if there's a need to wake us up. I was active, and I wasn't sleeping. But I found out in hindsight, there was an interview given by Vadim Kirpichenko at the time, who was my boss. I didn't know that he was, but he was in charge of the Directorate S in the KGB, which was illegals. He said that the most important aspect of people like me being in the United States was us being in the United States, which is the definition of a sleeper, because in those days there was a spy war going on between the CIA and the FBI. The other agents that operated in the U.S. were all diplomats, and if diplomatic relations had been broken up, there was nobody left other than us who could interact with two incredibly successful moles in the CIA and the FBI. So I found that out after the fact. I have a friend who was counterintelligence in the FBI, and he told me I am the only sleeper that he's aware of that had real tasks to perform. Fundamentally, I think it had something to do with the fact that I could impersonate an American, because all the other people, most likely, it's very difficult once you reach adult age to acquire another language with just very little accent. I'm very good at imitating sounds, and so the moment I came to the U.S., I was Jack Barsky, born in New Jersey, and all the others were smuggled into other countries, primarily where they got citizenship. Canada and Brazil were the favorites.
Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Starting therapy can be hard. The right therapist for you may not be in your area. BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy session as a phone call, as a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. If you think you might benefit from therapy, consider BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/Captainese. Clicking that link helps you support this channel, and it also gives you a 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. Again, go to betterhelp.com/Captainese. Clicking that link gives you 10% off your first month of therapy.
The other agents that operated in the U.S. were all diplomats, and if diplomatic relations had been broken up, there was nobody left other than us who could interact with two incredibly successful moles in the CIA and the FBI. So I found that out after the fact. I have a friend who was counterintelligence in the FBI, and he told me I am the only sleeper that he's aware of that had real tasks to perform. Fundamentally, I think it had something to do with the fact that I could impersonate an American, because all the other people, most likely, it's very difficult once you reach adult age to acquire another language with just very little accent. I'm very good at imitating sounds, and so the moment I came to the U.S., I was Jack Barsky, born in New Jersey, and all the others were smuggled into other countries, primarily where they got citizenship. Canada and Brazil were the favorites.
So you were, as a child, you were born into a small village. Your parents were both teachers, so they were treated pretty well in the Soviet Union, right? I mean, they knew what they were doing. Education was central to the Soviet ideology, so they were responsible for implementing this Marxist, Leninist principles. And I'm not going to say brainwash, but shape the mind of the next generation, right?
You're absolutely right. The way you stay in power is to infuse the ideology that you're interested in, that you want to preserve, into the minds of young children, and it started in kindergarten. It was brainwashing.
It was, it's something that the woke movement is definitely very aware of. It was also when World War II did a lot of damage to the country. So your everyday life, how big was the devastation? Was there like an assigned food ration for an adult?
And the cities were like, the big cities, like they were in ruins, and there was hunger all over the place. Being born in a village, there were peasants. They grew food. A lot of my nourishment came from potatoes, and I was malnourished. But my parents kept chickens and rabbits, so occasionally we had some meat. But, I also can't remember having eaten a really good-tasting meal in my younger years. Food was rationed, period. I mean, if you wanted to, for instance, you couldn't go to your local farmer and buy butter from them. They had their quotas that would be fed into the government stores. So yes, we had coupons. There was a limit to how much you could buy. And I remember one time my mother sent me to go shopping. She gave me a wallet with the coupons, and I lost the wallet. That was a humongous disaster, because there was some food you could buy without coupons, but the supply was limited, and it was very expensive. Thank God somebody, and these coupons didn't have a name on it, so somebody could have stolen them. But thank God a neighbor found the wallet. Otherwise, I would have gotten a real bad beating.
How was the relationship with your parents, especially with your father?
My father, with regard to bringing up and maturing a son, was fundamentally useless. I'm thanking him now for what he did, and what he did well was that he took care of us materially, because he was a smart man and he was career-oriented. He didn't have a chance to mature as a human being, as a father, as a man, because when World War II ended, he was 18 years old. One day, we played a game of checkers, and I beat him. I was about 12 years old. And then he said, okay, how about this? We play 10 more games. For every game that you win, I give you $1. And for every game I win, you owe me 10 cents. 10 games later, I had $10. If I'm a dad, I'm just going to get up and hug my son and say, man, I'm so proud of you, you going to go places. He couldn't do it. He just was not able to do this. And I cannot remember anybody having ever said to somebody else in the family the 3 words, I love you. There was no emotional interaction. The emotion may have been anger, like if I messed up, I got beat up. But the I love you, the hugging, the kissing, I never saw my parents kiss. So I did not grow up learning by example how to love. And that messed up my early years quite a bit. It's such a need for every individual, particularly children, to be loved. So it was like what they call tough love. And, we didn't know any better. My friends were treated in a similar fashion. The first love I had actually was falling in love with communist ideology.
I think part of the reason why you were such a brilliant spy is because the preparation started at age 0. There's a complex correlation between an emotionally absent father and the child's ability to detach from reality. And I don't know you personally, but you probably have a very good ability to compartmentalize in your head. Every trait can be seen as a blessing and as a curse. And the characteristics that you develop as a consequence of this minor PTSD are no less than perfect for being a spy. You have emotional self-sufficiency. So growing up with an emotionally detached father, a child learns to kind of rely on themselves for emotional support. So you're fostering a sense of self-sufficiency. So this can be obviously beneficial in espionage, where you often operate alone and you need to manage your emotions independently. And then you have this ability to detach emotionally that makes you resilient to stress and pressure. So this compartmentalization, if that's a word, also makes it easier for you to adopt different identities. So this ability to seamlessly switch between identities is obviously crucial for an agent. Many other people would tell Chelsea that they were in fact spying and that everything didn't burn in fire back in Germany, pretty soon. But you were consistent enough with the story, even giving her fake ancestor names, so she found out that they were fake when she tried to do like the ancestry test. But people recruited into the KGB as spies already underwent their father's spy academy.
That was an absolutely brilliant analysis. That was even better than Jordan Peterson, because I tell you, I give a testimony in church, and the title of the testimony, God Had a Plan for Me. And I start out that for me to be here in the United States and now give a message to Christians, non-Christians, I had to start out in a communist society, and I had to be treated by my parents the way I was treated. As a matter of fact, I'm what I would call a rather extreme stoic. I am insensitive. I am somewhat. Doctors have told me I'm insensitive to pain, and I feel pain, physical pain, but not as much as others because I got beat up. And yes, you're absolutely right. If I get a copy of this tape, I want to take this part out and use it sort of in my presentations. That was after. What are you doing as a job to earn a living? How come you're such a psychologist?
I spend a lot of time alone. So when you're alone, you either become insane or enlightened. So I read a lot and I study a lot. I'm full of useless information, but I also think a lot. Actually, I wanted to tell you that, when you started talking about God and the plan, even as I was listening to your interviews, I thought to myself, man, this plan started from the age of 0. So I have a habit of giving an opinion or answer myself and then asking the question. So I'm going to ask you, what type of people did KGB look for?
They were looking for a certain set of traits that was not easy to find. Literally, they were combing through hundreds, if not thousands, of possible candidates. Quickness of intellect, deep erudition. So they were looking for really smart people and people who were fast thinkers, fearlessness, ease of transition. In other words, the ability to move from one situation in life to another without much of a problem, the ability to operate in isolation, well-controlled inclination to adventure, and language ability. You put this all together, this is an interesting combination that is hard to find. And the inclination to adventure, it was something that I just had. They were studying me for 18 months in personal interaction with my, not recruiter, the handler who was the first KGB agent I was in touch with for 18 months. And when I told him that a friend of mine in my junior year in college went hitchhiking from East Germany all the way to the Black Sea in Bulgaria, to go through communist countries like that was an adventure. And when I told my handler that we did that, he probably was really impressed, because it's, the no fear of uncertainty. And the job that I agreed to do was nothing but uncertainty. I had some ideas, but they were mostly wrong.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because those are traits that, obviously those are traits that people who went through Father's Spy Academy gain, but they're also traits that you're just born with. It's the same traits that CIA looks for. So before you asked me, we're talking about this inclination to adventure. You see, it goes with, because of my personality, I'm very comfortable living in uncertainty. I always gravitated towards jobs that have very low chance of success, but when you do succeed, it's very exponential. I mean, people crave security. See, I never craved that. You kind of learn how to be in this position where you never know what's going to happen. So at the moment, I'm an option trader, and I dived right into podcasting now. So I believe in choosing what you love and then let it kill you. So if that doesn't work out, I don't necessarily have a plan B, but every time I aim at something, it happens because partially I'm delusional enough to keep on going when rationality would say otherwise, and then partially because I enjoy not knowing what's going to happen. So it's definitely a trade. So I forgot what I was about to ask you, but
what you just said, it's about, we do stuff and say, it's going to work out, and what drives us is curiosity.
Certain things in theory you couldn't get away with, but if you add a little bit of recklessness, you can actually get away with that. It becomes kind of like a risky territory when you have a streak of success of getting away with something that in theory should not work. So it is a risk because you have to know when to cash your chips and go. But a little bit of recklessness definitely helps. How did KGB find you out of the rest? And how did they approach you? I assume they were keeping like a file of every single individual, right?
You guys in the US have a debt that has grown to $1 trillion in the past 3 months, while your economy only grew by $5.5 trillion in the past 3 years. How's that one for you? I can offer you a degree of safety against inflation. You can now be less miserable about the prices, which seem to always rise more than expected, as inflation just won't go away. Look, the government isn't going to take care of you, so forget the protests and do it yourself. Take matters into your own hands is what successful people do. I decided to help my audience shelter their assets and diversify them into gold, which is something that has always been used by the rich to preserve wealth throughout the history. Birch Gold Group makes the process straightforward. They can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k account into a tax-advantaged physical gold IRA without any of the out-of-the-pocket costs. Just text CAPTAINESE to 989898 to receive their free info kit on gold IRAs, packed with insider information on how gold and silver can protect your savings. I've checked out their references before partnering with them, and their endorsements include Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and Ron Paul, and I trust these people. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, countless 5-star reviews, and thousands of happy customers, Birch Gold is the nation's #1 gold IRA provider. To learn more, text CAPTAINESE to 989898 and claim your free info kit on gold IRAs.
The KGB did, and in East Germany, it was East German Secret Police. They kept a record of every adult in the country. I think what happened is the KGB had access to those files, and they sorted through the files. And what they were looking for initially, like the CIA does, that they were recruiting in top colleges, and they were looking for top-notch students. And I was a standout. You look at my file, it says, oh, the recipient of a scholarship that was called the Karl Marx Scholarship. And I also was a member of the Communist Party. I was very active in the communist movement. So that's the kind of person you want to talk to and figure out, does he have the traits that we were talking about? Because that is not in the records. In the records was that I'm smart and active. They had some collaborators, and one of them one day showed up in my dorm room. This guy was the most idiotic wannabe spy I ever met in my life. So he knocked on my door in the dorm room. It was on a Saturday. How did he know where I lived? We didn't have nameplates. And at that time, that didn't occur to me. That's hindsight analysis. Anyway, he comes in and he introduces himself as a representative from the company. And he said, I'm coming in from this company. I want to just talk with you a little bit about your plans after you graduate. The reason I said he was stupid, he didn't even know how his own country functions. Nobody recruited. When you got your degrees, you were assigned. I played along and talked a little. We talked about this and that and what it was like to study chemistry and blah, blah, blah. And then he switched very quickly, turned around and said, I have a confession to make. I'm not really from that company. I'm from the government. I could have made him really uncomfortable by asking, what part of the government? I didn't, because that would have sort of messed things up. I was curious to find out what he's after, and I already figured in my mind this is some kind of recruitment. So, and then he just finished saying that I'm from the government. He said, and can you imagine one day to work for the government? And I said, yeah, but not as a chemist. So he had an answer to the question he didn't ask. So he invited me to have lunch at the most expensive restaurant in town a couple of days later. And when I entered the room, I saw him at a table and there was another person there. And I approached very carefully because, in those days in East Germany, there weren't enough seats in restaurants, so it was very, very often that you had a stranger sitting next to you sharing the table. But he got up and he came to me and he took me to the table and he said, I'd like to introduce Comrade Herman. We are working with our Soviet comrade. Herman was obviously not a Russian name, but and then the little guy who was the German, he just said goodbye, and that's how I landed not in the KGB, landed as I became a recruit for the KGB. That was not recruitment. I became a somebody you need to study. And as I told you already, it took Herman about 18 months. We met twice a month or so, and he became a father figure to me. He was about 10 years older. I shared everything with him. I shared, the good stuff and the bad stuff and the fears and anxieties and, as I already told you, the adventures. And he gave me some tasks to do. Some of them made me uncomfortable, where I had to pretend to be somebody else and get information from a stranger, and on and on. And, I guarantee you now, every time we met, he sat down and wrote a report, and eventually that report wound up in headquarters in Berlin. And so at one point, it was sometime in the summer, he told me, hey, we need to give you some more training, and I can't do that, so we're going to send you to Berlin for 3 weeks. Okay, so in Berlin, I met a guy named Boris. That was my first secret meeting, with where you meet at a place at a time and you have code phrases you exchange. And so he gave me some training, some tasks, but the next to last day, he took me to headquarters. I had no idea. He was going to introduce me to somebody. So the door opens, a big door, and what I see is a diminutive, a small man sitting behind a huge desk. Very, very unimpressive. But before I could, make up my mind that this guy is just another idiot, he opened his mouth. And what the words that came out of his mouth may as well have been cast in steel. He had tremendous intellectual and emotional, psychological presence. So in hindsight, I think he was the head of the KGB in East Germany. It's a guess, but it's a pretty good guess. And he started the same way as the German, with a bunch of small talk, and also switched 180 degrees all of a sudden. It may have been sort of a way they had conversations with people like me. And so he asked me, so are you in or not? I wasn't prepared for that. I had toyed with the idea, and I didn't know, I had a phenomenal career ahead of me, given that I was an A student and I was very highly regarded. I was actually the student representative of the governing body of the section chemistry. And all of a sudden I had to make a decision, and I said, I can't give you an answer right now because I don't know if I'm qualified and I'm not trained. And he said, with his steely voice, don't worry about it. We know that you're qualified and we will train you. We only work with people that can make important decisions rather quickly. So by tomorrow noon, I'm expecting your answer. And that was a final test, If I still stall, they don't want me. So it was a sleepless night. I weighed back and forth. And eventually, what won me over to say yes to something completely unknown, but, it was the adventure, the ability to travel to the West, because the West was not accessible to East Germans. And the huge flattery that came with being invited to join the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet. My ego just grew like another foot. My ego was already overflowing because I was such a good student. And I tell you, I was so highly regarded that when I fathered a child out of wedlock, which the party didn't like, nobody ever called me in their office and reprimanded me. It was like it didn't exist. I was that highly regarded, and now I get this offer. I said, I became my own god, fundamentally. And so I said yes.
I mean, it's very attractive, this sense of being above the law, this living outside legality.
The moment I was working with Herman, I already lived outside of legality because he gave me Western literature to read. And that was forbidden. And then when I moved to Berlin and I got my training, they told me, you better get yourself a TV set and watch West German television. Interestingly enough, they wanted, the KGB had plans to send me to West Germany. Initial training was all directed towards West Germany. One of the first things I had to read was the Constitution of West Germany. And then one of the things that was part of the training, that they told me that everybody like me had to learn another language and become fluent in it. And they allowed me to pick a language, so the U.S. was not in play. I picked English. And within a week, they had sent a tape recorder and told me, just tape something, say something, and whatever you want to say for about a half hour, and speak English the way you learned it. And the moment they got the tape, within another week, I was on a plane to Moscow, because they figured, my God, we have a real special talent here. Because you may or may not know this, I did some research on how easy or hard it is to speak another language with barely an accent when you learn the language as an adult. And in the medical literature, it says it's fundamentally impossible because your speech organs as an adult are formed, and you just can't do it. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger. When I arrived in Moscow, I was interviewed by two ladies. One was a born American, had emigrated, probably married to a KGB agent or so, that poor woman. And the other one was a professor at Moscow University. She was KGB, obviously, but that was her day job, so to speak. And we spoke for about a half hour, and the question was really, can we smuggle him into the U.S. as a born American? And the Russian said, I don't think so. And the American, as optimistic as Americans are, said, yeah, I can teach him.
So the training was for a very long period of time. So, and they also thought you, by the way, just to explain to the audience, Morse code is a method of encoding text characters as these sequences of dots and dashes. So it's used for transmitting messages over telecommunication systems. It's secure, and you have no idea for who it actually is. It's like texting for people who have way too much time on their hands, basically. And they by the way, were you ever bored doing that? I mean, I assume it took a long time unraveling a message that might be just saying congratulations.
It was horrible to sit once a week at 9:15 on a Thursday to dial my frequency and write down the digit. It was nothing but digits. Morse code can also transmit letters. And then decode this. And sometimes it took until after midnight. And occasionally I was really annoyed. Like at the beginning of a message, what I read there was, congratulations, comrade so-and-so, Dieter, that was my cover name, on the International Day of the Worker, 1st of May. I said, well, I don't need this crap. You're wasting my time. It was frustrating. The communication, unlike what is portrayed on TV and in the movies, I never met another agent face-to-face while in the United States. I did meet agents in other countries, but it was a no-no for an illegal to meet another agent, because that would have put us super valuable assets at risk.
What were some other ways of communicating?
For me to send reports back, it was secret writing via regular airmail, but that was awkward too. First of all, I was allowed 2 letters a month, and each letter was, I was limited to 2 pieces of paper. There isn't a whole lot of information you can stick onto 2 pieces of paper. And another idiotic thing, once a month I had to communicate an expense report, because my expenses compared to what they spent training me and maintaining me were negligible. You know, they paid for my medical expenses and my rent and half my car expenses eventually, but it's nothing. And there were situations when I had much more information to transmit that I could fit on these letters in secret writing. Oh, by the way, to prepare and mail a letter took most of the day on Saturdays. When I had a full-time job, it had to be done on a weekend. First of all, you have to prepare the message. Then you have to encrypt some certain information, such as names, addresses, phone numbers, and so forth. Before mailing this thing, I had to check to make sure that I wasn't under surveillance. Because if I put a letter into a mailbox and I'm observed doing that, counter surveillance will pull that letter out. They had a way to do this. I was also supposed to live like a real American, which means, date people, you go to parties and all that. My social life was somewhat limited. So anyway, I'm getting back to when I had too much information that couldn't fit in a letter. I put the cartridge into the plaster of Paris, let it dry, roll it in dirt so it looks like a regular rock, and put it in a spot in a park where another agent knew when to pick it up and where to pick it up. and that's called a dead drop operation. And I conducted about 3 or 4 of those in New York, and they all worked like clockwork.
Talk to me about some of these surveillance detection strategies that you were training. I mean, especially how do you remember people's faces that you keep on seeing, but you may not remember enough to be actually aware that that face has been, like, that you saw this face a while ago?
Tradecraft training I got by the KGB was as good as it gets. They taught me how to drive a car in Moscow. We tried to do this by a vehicle. That didn't work very well because you need to have another person behind you, another vehicle. They need to know roughly what route you're taking so they can see whether some other vehicles are following you. If you try to see this in the rearview mirror, you might actually have an accident. So we scrapped this idea. It was on foot. It was mandated a 3-hour walk through the city, take public transportation, go visit a department store, take elevators, escalators, and go to a movie theater, buy tickets, and go get something to eat. Just like go on a route that you have researched ahead of time, where there are spots when somebody follows you, and the people that follow you is not just one. Usually it's a team of 7, 8 people. And what they do, they got to keep you in sight at all times, because the reason they follow you is to see if you're doing something that looks like espionage, right? So you got to find spots where, or situations where one of those lead individuals got to come close enough to you where you can see him and remember things like dress, face. I forgot to remember shoes. That's going to become very important in a second. Where they have to come closer, like when you wait at a bus station, when you go into a drugstore, for instance, and walk around, and you can turn around. You have a reason to turn around. Go look at another shelf, and you can see who's behind you. My favorite spot was, of all times, and I always caught somebody. There was a street that went down the hill and curved a little bit, and at the bottom of the hill there was a phone booth. And when you entered the phone booth and you simulated a phone call, you had to turn around, and you could see who was coming after you. If you saw the very same face, and when you see the same face twice, you know that you're being followed. It was harder to determine that you were not followed. We did 7 or 8 exercises when my liaison, my handler, came to me, to my apartment and says, "Hey, Jack, it's time." And didn't call me Jack Dieter. It's time to, go on your route. And so I went unprepared, obviously. And obviously this was a competition, because those people wanted to win. They were supposed to do a really good job. And I beat them every time. And I was the guy who initially gave me the training said I was one of the best, which helped me a lot while spying for the KGB. And when I quit the KGB, because then it helped me to find out whether somebody was following me, whether it was, KGB or FBI. When I couldn't find any evidence, I felt, I was out of the woods. I was in the clear. And that's when I told my then wife, let's go buy a house. That's when I was done. My ability to remember faces nowadays would be useless, at least against American counterintelligence, because the CIA developed a way for people to change face completely within a minute. I met the lady who, she and her husband developed that. Her name is Jonah Mendez. I met her at an event, and she demonstrated how middle-aged white lady, how she could become a young black person. So now what you got to focus on, which is sort of hard to change, is footwear, shoes, and what I found out is, as I'm paying attention to this kind of thing, gait, how people are walking. You can't change your gait. That's nearly impossible.
See, there's this paradox of combining hyper-carefulness with recklessness. You know, how they say the best shoplifter is the one who walks in a store like they work there. A very good thing a robber on the run can do is to walk up to a police officer to ask for directions to Subway.
There's this one guy who did something when I did surveillance detection. I did something that is exactly what you just mentioned about asking a policeman. I'm waiting for a bus at a bus stop, and in those days cigarettes were extremely cheap in Russia, and it was not unusual when a stranger approached you and asked you for a cigarette. So there's one guy came up to me and said, "Can I have a cigarette?" This guy, and it was disclosed to me that he was surveillance. I never suspected it.
It's the normalcy signaling, advertisement of fitness, human edition. Have you heard of pronking?
No.
Okay, so it's one of the useless information that I carry around. So healthy gazelles in nature tend to go very close and jump in front of lions, and it looks like they're just plain stupid for doing that, but it's an advertisement of fitness. So it's a way for gazelles to demonstrate their fitness to predators, because by showing that they are strong and agile and healthy, they communicate to the lion that they're not an easy prey. So it's a strategy to discourage the predator from pursuing them, because it would take a lot of energy to, you can use that for a less challenging target, but you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position because someone who is who you are certainly wouldn't do that. Human advertisement of fitness, let's put it that way. But did they actually have this authentic understanding of Americans? Because I travel a lot on my own, and there's way more to a culture than languages. There are certain gestures that people do in India. They move their head a certain way when they're speaking. And in my travels, I also noticed the difference in the directness of communication. It varies greatly, because in some cultures, people are very direct and explicit. And then in other cultures, indirect communication and this reading between the lines is more common. So what I'm trying to ask is, weren't you, after all this training, a little bit unadapted personality-wise?
Absolutely, 100%. As a matter of fact, the KGB was incapable and didn't do it as far as training me culturally and behavior-wise. When I learned English, I memorized every single word that was new to me. And I learned a lot of English by reading newspapers and magazines, which, the language is not the language the way it's spoken colloquially. So I used a lot of words that people didn't understand, even though they were English words. And it was, you talk funny. They didn't draw any conclusions that there was something quite wrong with me. I was just like a little weird. But here's one that could have really busted me, and I just found that out a couple of months ago when I watched the movie Inglourious Bastards. And there's a party scene where somebody says, get me 5 glasses of and then he started counting. 1, 2, wait a minute. Americans start counting like this. So he started doing this. Okay? And that's Europeans start counting with your thumb, right? Counting on your hand, you start with your thumb. American, for me to start like this and then go like that is awkward. There's one fellow who was a good friend of mine, still is. One time I was already a manager in corporate, and he said, "Hey, Jack, I got to tell you something. There's something not quite right about you. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to find out, but I'm just telling you, I have this funny feeling when I enter." And he was the first non-family that when I came out of the closet, I had dinner with him, and I told him.
So you showed up in the U.S. in 1978, and you had this fake passport, which you destroyed on your second day. How did you destroy the passport exactly? Did you light it on fire, or?
If there was a course given by the KGB, Destruction of Passport 101, I missed it. I was in a hotel. It was a dangerous neighborhood, but I didn't realize it. I picked a hotel out of a Yellow Pages, and when I got to the hotel, it was already dark. And then the next morning, I went outside to look for something to eat, and I realized that I didn't belong there because everybody in the streets was dark-skinned. I decided right then and there to get rid of the passport and then use the birth certificate, an authentic birth certificate of Jack Barsky. I went to the bathroom and tried to set the passport on fire. First, I ripped out the page with a picture, set that on fire. It didn't burn. They're flame retardant or flame resistant altogether. But it smoked, and the smoke went up the ceiling. I threw that thing in the toilet. The smoke detector didn't go off. If that goes off, I am busted. I was instructed if I'm arrested, I should ask for an East German diplomat. There were no diplomats, no Russians, no East Germans in Chicago, and my backstory wouldn't have held up at all. So immediately they would have known I was illegal in the country, and they would have tried to either turn me, which wouldn't have been possible, or put me in jail for whatever, 10 years, whatever. I had a good half a dozen situations when I should have been found out, and I didn't.
To add another one, I don't know if you know that, but passports contain this security features, so they have embedded chips and special inks that produce toxic fumes when you burn them.
Toxic?
They produce toxic fumes when you burn a passport. It's the thicker cover and the embedded chip, and that's why. And oftentimes they don't burn completely, so you're leaving partial remains anyway.
So I was lucky to just have tried to burn the one page with my picture.
Correct.
Wow.
Jack Barsky, where did that name come from?
Jack Barsky was an individual born in Orange, New Jersey in 1944 to Jewish parents. Jack Barsky passed away at the age of 11, and he was buried in a Jewish cemetery in Maryland. This is where a KGB agent detected the tombstone and was able to acquire a bona fide copy of Barsky's birth certificate. So, and that's how I started living like and working like an ordinary American, because I had no social life. While I was a messenger, no social life. But I had fallen in love with a lady. So a lot of work, and, that got to a point where, I really liked the job, but this espionage got in the way of my job, because I resented having to spend all that time to make a letter and mail it. So I invented some shortcuts that were actually dangerous, risky. I didn't do surveillance for 3 hours, and then, as you know, I got married, and now I had a family to support. I became very successful at the job that they sent me to the U.S. for, to become an American. And that they knew that if I'm successful, eventually they would have to bring me back. Because if you succeed in integrating yourself into Western society, eventually there will be a danger that you might defect or just not ever come home. And you become a stranded asset that could be very dangerous. So when they did call me home, their prediction actually turned out to be true, because I refused.
Well, you did your job too well, that's for sure. So while you were working for the KGB, did they take care of your family back home?
Very much so. I had a wife, and we had a son together, and they had a cook and a chauffeur. In those days, it was nearly impossible to have a phone in your apartment in East Germany. She had a phone, and she got my German salary. They gave it to her, so she didn't have to work. and she had enough money to buy the most expensive car, for which there was a waiting list of like maybe 10 years. And so she had they financially and standard of living, they were very well taken care of. When I resigned from the KGB with a lie, when they called me back, the lie was that I had was infected with HIV/AIDS, which they believed, and I asked them to give my my wife the dollars that were saved on my account because they paid me. They got money, but not everything that was saved. Cash is king in espionage, so the carrier probably took half of it for himself. So yeah, they treated us really, really well, and they also promised me once that when my stint is over and I come back permanently to East Germany, that they would find a way to get me a house. In my 8th year of operating in the United States, the medal was handed to my wife, and it came with ironically, it came with $10,000.
But wait, the U.S. dollars?
Yes, isn't it ironic? I don't have to explain to you why that's ironic. Instead of rubles, they gave me the currency of the country that we were trying to destroy.
Huh.
Because the rubles were worthless. They didn't really have enough introspection to understand how illogic that behavior was and how just incredibly stupid it was. But, this comes with the arrogance of being elite. We have the same thing going on in the government in the United States these days. They're doing so many stupid things because they just like the way I did stupid things when I thought I was my own god.
They certainly saw that the U.S. had a lot going for them. What was the rationale?
The rationale is can be summarized in one word: imperialism. The United States was an imperialist country that ruled over weaker countries like Third World and exploited them and took wealth away from them. It was a rationale that didn't hold up very long for me because when I started working in the United States in the system, I realized that there was a lot of hard work and a lot of innovation, and that wealth that I now participated in was mostly created at home.
So you had this double identity life, and you were doing that pretty well. As you said, Barsky had nothing to do with Dietrich, and Dietrich wasn't responsible for Barsky. But talk to me about December of 1988, when you received the sign.
And that is when I was ordered back home. Somebody whispered something into an KGB agent's ears that I was in danger of being arrested by the FBI. And that's the last thing they wanted to hear, because they were very, very protective of us. Because, if I'm arrested, it's not because they cared about me. They cared about me not being in jail, because if I'm in jail, they got a headache because they need to get me out. Why do they need to get me out? If they don't get me out, nobody else will sign up for that job. So now they had to plan to frame an American and then do the negotiation and all that. So they ordered me back home. And I was, when they were talking about how long I was going to stay in the U.S., it was 11, 12 years, and I got close to the end. So they ordered me back. Emergency procedure. There was a signal, a red dot on a spot where I passed by every morning on the way to work. And when I saw that, that's the last thing that I expected, and I internally cursed. I'm not going to use that word here on camera. But I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to just keep on going and make a beeline to the border of Canada and go to the Soviet embassy and ring the bell, and they would get me out of Canada and back into East Germany. Well, I didn't do it. I went back to work. Why? When I rejoined the human race, this is when I finally was, quote-unquote, victimized by true love. And true love is unconditional. When I was told, come back home, I was in a real dilemma. because Chelsea's mother couldn't earn enough of a living to make a comfortable life for herself and the child. They would have grown up in poverty. She would have grown up in poverty. I stalled. There was precedent that at one time I was injured as a bike messenger and I couldn't function for about a month. So I couldn't respond to I couldn't take down I couldn't write with my right hand, okay? And eventually when I explained that to them, there could have been something like that. So I had some time to figure out what to do next. And I analyzed. I didn't come to any conclusion whatsoever. And one day I was forced to make the decision. And that is when I was approached by an agent. I was waiting for a train, subway train. It was early in the morning. And he comes from my right, comes up to me and whispered in my ear, "Come back, come home, or else you're dead." And that was spoken in a heavy accent. Clearly, I strongly believe that the "you or else you're dead" was because he wasn't really very good with the English language. He probably wanted to say, "or else you're busted, or else you get arrested." However, I also knew that the KGB had a history of assassinating defectors. And if they had interpreted my defection, my quitting, and my refusal to go back home as a defection, I was in danger. So I came up with this lie. I already told you about it. I sent him in my last letter in secret writing that, I wish I could come home and enjoy life back in my home country, East Germany, but I have HIV/AIDS. And they had no reason to believe that. I didn't know that they believed it until my son came back and actually confirmed this, because they went to my German family and told them that I had died from AIDS. They believed it 100%. And the East German, what's the Bureau of Public Records or whatever they call this, had Albrecht Dittrich as dying in 1988. And so that's how I got away with quitting the KGB. And I was able to support my lovely daughter, who is now in her 30s.
It's fascinating because on one side of the scale, you have prestige, you have adoration, returning as a hero, you have everything a person would want. And then on the other side of the scale, you have nothing except your child, Chelsea.
Any rational thinker would have come up with the following conclusion: if I'm arrested, then I'm no good for Chelsea anyway, so I might as well go. It was a decision that came from my subconscious. I'm staying. There was no thought process behind it.
Where would you be today if you did end up returning home? What do you think your life would be like?
Most likely, if I'm still alive, I would be a miserable old guy in Russia, because the wall came down 1 year later in 1989. So they would have invited me to move to Moscow. I like Russian people, but in hindsight, I know that they treated people who wound up in Moscow, they didn't treat them very well because they didn't trust them. An MI6 individual who was a double agent, the most successful British agent in World War II and Cold War, who managed to escape and wound up in Russia, and they assigned a wife to him to watch the guy. I would be miserable. I'm so glad I'm here. I'm so glad that my personality that always wanted to be in freedom and is anti-authoritarian does reasonably well in America. It still does reasonably well in the U.S. society. I would have been so darn miserable.
So when did you stop spying officially? When did you stop being
it was fundamentally in December of 1988.
So after that, you had reasons to not assume that you were actually being discovered by the FBI, right? So you just kept on living a normal life?
Absolutely. They didn't know about me. And so I started constructing my version of the American dream. You know, I made enough money to buy a first house in the suburbs, and then I made more money. Bought a better house.
How were they able to locate you, and how did you got discovered? How did they came to contact with you?
That's another situation where somebody else made a decision that impacted me radically. And this fellow was the name is Vasily Mitrokin. He head of the archives, KGB archives for the Directorate S. So he had access to all the files. And as he was reading through this stuff, he realized that he was really serving a very evil organization. And he figured, you know, let's do some damage to this organization. You know, I want to have clean hands. And so he smuggled out over time bits and pieces of information on small pieces of paper that he put in his underwear and in his socks. When the Soviet Union fell apart, he felt it was safe to actually tell the CIA what he had. He went to the American embassy, and the CIA agent there told him, go away. He thought it was a plant. He didn't, you know, said, we're not interested in that. So this guy's career probably came to a quick end after Mitrokin shared the same information with MI6, and they said, let's come on in and let's have a cup of tea. There was a little note amongst the many, many notes that says, there's a guy named Jack Barsky, he's an illegal and lives in the Northeast. That eventually came to the FBI, and the FBI did a search in the Social Security Register and found out there's one Jack Barsky, or not, there weren't so many, who got his Social Security number when he was in his mid-30s. All they knew at the time was that I had survived many, many years. So I was a very, very highly trained agent. And what they didn't know was whether I was still active. And if I'm still active, they can't get close to me because I knew how to find out whether I'm being investigated. So they took almost 2 years to watch me from a distance. They even bought the house next to where I lived in the country and had a couple of agents live there for a while. They didn't catch me in any kind of an operational activity other than the alarm bells went on when my wife went on a trip to England to visit a relative, an uncle of hers. That she was followed by MI5 the entire time, and another alarm bell went off when I got lost driving in New Jersey. And I had to make some stupid maneuvers, and it seemed like I was actually checking for surveillance. But the guy, the fellow who was the lead agent, he watched me from a distance up in the hills with binoculars. He was sitting on a chair, and he had a couple of books next to him that indicated he was a bird watcher in case somebody came by. And he noticed two things: that I loved my children. I was playing outside with them. We had a basketball hoop, but we played one against two. And he also noticed that body language, that my interaction with my wife wasn't very pleasant occasionally. But based on the love for my children, he convinced his boss not to arrest me, but to just detain me and find a way for me to share whatever I can share with them, what would have been of value to the FBI. She wanted to put me in jail. He eventually convinced her and her superior to just do what they wound up doing. Because one day him and his partner came. They engineered a traffic stop, a phony traffic stop. I commuted every day from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. I had to go across a toll bridge, where I had to actually stop and pay the toll. And a state policeman waved me over, and he said, this is a routine traffic stop. Step out of the vehicle, please. Now, I wasn't sharp enough anymore to immediately know that this was phony. I just followed the orders because a routine traffic stop in the U.S. says license and insurance, please, and you stay in the vehicle. So I stepped out, and then I noticed there's, again, somebody from the right coming up to me, and as he gets close enough, he flipped an ID, and I didn't have to look at it. I knew it was like FBI. At that point, it was clear that, okay, I'm in trouble. And Joe Riley, who is the agent who was the lead in this case, he's the one who introduced himself, and later told me that all blood left my face. It was like all of a sudden my past I already had forgotten. Literally, I had put this someplace in a vault and locked it up in my brain that I ever served the KGB, that I was a German. I was a middle-class American. And all of a sudden, the floodgates opened and the history came back, and I knew I was in trouble.
I had just to add, I had a guest on my podcast who was a serial bank robber, and he described the same feeling when he was living a normal life for a longer period of time, and then he was approached by an officer who asked him, "So what do you know about bank robbery in California?" And he had the same reaction. They were bugging your house. They bought a home next to your house where the FBI agents moved in and observed your every move as a neighbor. I'm not sure if I'm impressed or concerned about this absolute lack of limitations and the lengths that these organizations go to.
Let me tell you why they took so long. They were concerned that if I was still active, that there was another mole that I'm running. Because if I'm active, I would eventually lead them to the mole. But they also had bugged my kitchen, and at one time, they had my confession on tape when I had a verbal altercation with my wife, who was just angry with me, and I told her, "Hey, listen, I am on your side. I'm serving you. I love you, and I love Chelsea. And I tell you, I can prove it to you." And I told her that I once was an agent and what the risk I took to stay with them. And as I'm saying that, there was somebody in an FBI office who had my confession. And pretty soon after, they eventually it detained me. And, that was what I just told you. And if I can continue with that tale, I caught myself rather quickly. So, first of all, the agent told me, Joe Riley told me, sit down in the back seat, and there was his partner, and he had a gun strapped to his ankle, clearly visible. That was obviously a little bit of manipulation. Okay, man, we're serious here. And that didn't bother me. I caught myself real quick, and so I asked, "So am I under arrest?" And Joe, who was driving the vehicle, turned around quickly and said, "No, nothing else." He just said no. And then instinctively, I knew that if I get them to like me, there's a better chance of me, doing better than if they don't like me. So I asked him, "So what took you so long?" And that I saw they couldn't suppress a smile. It's gallows humor, right? But it worked well. So, and then they took me to a motel, and they had rented all the rooms. It was an L-shaped motel. One wing they had rented, and at the beginning and the end of the hallway there were armed guards. They put me in the middle. And before they even could say something, I said to them, "Listen, I just want to say something. I have a family here. I have a life in the United States, and I know the only way for my family and myself to get away with a limited amount of damage is if I tell you everything that I know and cooperate fully, and I have every intent to do so." And they took that in, and we talked. They asked me questions for 2 hours, and then they let me go. First, they told me, "Call your wife, tell her you're going to be delayed because of work." and then they let me go. Not after warning me that for me to have an idea to flee, that wouldn't work because they had a whole surveillance team all over the place. I didn't have any thought of fleeing. Where would I go? I was dead. So I had no choice. But I spoke with all honesty because I didn't have the moral dilemma to know somebody who I could betray. Okay? And everything else, I have no problem because I had done enough research to know that communism was a big lie, that the Soviet Union was evil, that East Germany was run by evil communists. So I had no qualms to tell him everything that I knew. And again, luckily, I couldn't betray an individual.
Mm-hmm. But at that time, when you didn't really lead a life of an agent anymore, so to speak, were you also checking whether or not you're being followed? Were you doing that on a daily basis, the surveillance detection still, or did you just let it go?
I stopped doing this about 3 months after I quit, but I did still do surveillance detection for about 3 months. I also made sure that when on my way to work, I would use different routes, so I wasn't predictably in one spot at a certain time to prevent, somebody waiting for me and taking a shot at me. But after 3 months, I determined I was in the clear. I also, the one thing you can do that I was taught at the KGB to see if mail is opened that you receive, like regular mail, you write a letter to yourself with a fictitious address, like someplace in Manhattan. I picked a building, and I used one with the letters where you have to lick it to close it, and I left 1 inch open. And because I was told human beings they don't have the skills to open a letter and then close it without leaving a trace. So that was done by machines, and machines routinely reglue the entire letter. So once you open it and there's one inch it's not glued, nobody opened your letter. So I did it, I learned this and it was trained by the KGB. I told you, when it comes to tradecraft, they were really, really good. And the other thing that they were really, really good was, keeping secrets and keeping a lot of stuff secret that they shouldn't have kept secret from me because they just, for one thing, not even telling me what my true mission was, and a few other things. When you are a lone wolf agent, you got to make your own decisions all the time, and if you don't have enough of a frame of reference, you're going to make some bad decisions. But they were really good. They kept secrets, so I couldn't betray anybody. Well, anyway, so bottom line, 3 months after I quit, I became a regular middle-class American citizen who purposely forgot that he ever was a spy.
It's these little things, that they taught you that are so super useful. Even now when I travel somewhere and I'm in a hotel, I know the staff often visits hotels. I know they have the keys. So what I will do is I will actually leave 2 objects at like the exact point, so if I have a wallet that's empty, but nevertheless, that's not the point. There's a wallet and I will put something on there, like a pencil, for example, at the exact angle. And then if I come back from outside, then if that's moved a little bit, then I'll know, okay, well, someone is definitely coming here.
That's very cool. Now this I probably would do if I travel to questionable countries. And traveling abroad, I've traveled only to Western countries, so they're really safe. Places like Turkey I wouldn't go to, and certainly not Russia or China. But that's very good of you. And I've been told that I'm very alert. I read the room very well. I'm very much aware of what's going on, and that's instinctive. Okay, I don't do this deliberately. People have told me that I may be talking to you and look you straight in the face, but I still know when somebody comes in and stuff like that. Okay, instinct. It's not deliberate.
So in your book, Deep Undercover, you talk about how you have to say goodbye to corporate life after coming out in public about your work as a spy. Now, as a public speaker now, is a bit of paranoia still there with you? I mean, I know you're not doing background checks on your audience, but is being is being as public as possible sort of a shield? You know what I mean?
I'm not worried, and I discussed it with the FBI. I mean, I'm clearly not out in public. I don't make political statements. Okay, number one. Even though I adhere to a lot of conservative values, conservative, not radical right. I'm trying to not be political, but philosophical. So I don't make enemies inside. With regard to, and the FBI agrees with that reasoning, with regard to Russian intelligence having an incentive to come after me, it's very low because my case is very old. And very important, I did not betray the motherland. That's a huge crime. If you betray Russia as a Russian, then they will come after you somehow. And any individual who may have felt personal betrayal is most likely not on this earth anymore. They were older than me. So, but having said that, there's one place I would never, ever, if you pay me $10 million, visit, and that's Moscow.
What do you think would happen if you went there, hypothetically speaking?
I would most likely fall out of a window. And I tell you why. When the KGB did that, and Russian intelligence does that too, they like to scare people. And there's nothing scarier to a would-be defector than somebody who has been in the United States for that many years, still meet an untimely death. Okay? And so that sends a message. We will get you no matter where you are and how long you think you'll survive. That was a method that the KGB used. They didn't. Once they assassinated defectors, the damage was already done. So there wasn't really a good reason to eliminate the person. It was to scare anybody else. Okay. So, and I would also not appear in countries where there's lawlessness. And there's a lot of countries that I would like to travel to, but I probably won't. I'm safe in the Western world, and I'm not worried about safety in the United States.
I mean, it's impressive the fact that you're not paranoid at all anymore, because I think that a certain degree of paranoia can be seen as like a PTSD from a long-term spy work. Putin, by the way, what do you think the KGB training gave Putin? I assume that it didn't prepare him for being the greatest leader in Russia, as they think.
Vladimir Putin was not a very successful spy, a very successful agent. First of all, he is an educated guess. So he got the training like all of his colleagues, and he studied German. He was very good at German. He still understands it well, and he speaks it. And they deployed him where? In Dresden, in East Germany. In a friendly country. The top agents would have been in Austria, West Germany, in Switzerland, or maybe in Berlin, where the action was. No, he was somebody like Herman. He was a liaison to the Stasi. He was a bureaucrat. He probably did a little bit of courier work into West Germany, and that was it. I met Oleg Kalugin, who was at one point the the head of counterintelligence for the Directorate S. No, actually, the first Directorate, espionage. And Putin reported to him, and Kalugin told me that he was mediocre. So when people ask me, what did Vladimir Putin learn that made him so successful as a politician? Two answers. He learned how to lie, like I did, and he was a really good networker. So when the Soviet Union fell apart and Russia dabbled with capitalism, the only people that knew how capitalism works were the ones that had operated in the West. They were KGB agents, and a lot of oligarchs that were ex-KGB agents, and they were friends of Vladimir Putin. And Putin was a really, really good and really good manipulator. And a good organizer. He was hired by I forgot his first name, Sobchak, the mayor of St. Petersburg, and he did a really good job organizing stuff for Sobchak. That Sobchak introduced him to Boris Yeltsin, who was president of Russia, and Putin just played his cards really well. He was very careful not to be seen as a threat to anybody else. And so he became liked by anybody else. And when it was time to appoint a successor, Yeltsin appointed him as successor. And nobody had a problem with that because they thought he was, he wasn't very dangerous. And once he had the position, he became the man he is today. So very, very manipulative. And that, I think, that's a talent, quote unquote, that was given to him at birth, not by the KGB.
Well, he definitely knew what would go by as a president. I was a real estate agent for a while, and I had a client that I was supposed to convince to, sell their house. And at the beginning, I started telling them what I can do for them as an agent. And sometimes I would convert them, sometimes I wouldn't. But then I started asking, what do you look for in an agent? And they told me. And then, so when I had that information, then I started demonstrating how I, as an agent, could provide that. So I think that what Putin does is really good, because Putin knows that Russians have this innate wish for a strong leader. I mean, Russia has been under the risk of invasion for a very long period of time. So I think it's innate in these people to have a strong leader, as opposed to a weak leader who is maybe a nice guy but doesn't inspire confidence. We've seen the raid in the White House. We've witnessed assassination attempts. I think that Americans, all in all, are still kind of naive. And I think that also comes from the United States never have been under the risk of invasion or under the fear of invasion.
You're saying exactly what I tell people. What Americans are naive. One of the reasons that the United States has never been occupied on its continental territory, and the Russian, and I call it the national DNA, have always been afraid of being invaded, because they were invaded throughout history, and they always have been looking for a strong man. We are nearly identical in our thinking in what we found out by observing.
What are the chances that the United States becomes a dictatorship in the future at some point?
I don't want to put a percentage on it, but if we keep on going the way we are going right now, we become an oligarchy like Russia. We already have oligarchs. We're talking about certain industries like the medical industry, and particularly the information technology industry, where they have just way too much power. If we're going down the same way, what we will have is a ruling elite. Elitism is at the root cause for eventually building centralized government or oligarchies, because there are enough people who maybe in the beginning honestly think that they can do for the rest of the idiots that they live with by taking care of them. There is still enough of a sound element in the United States, but then again, I live in a bubble. I have some friends with whom I disagree, but most everybody that I get to know these days, and these are bright, heart-centered, caring individuals, they think like you and me. And so I don't have a good understanding of how strong the influence on that is coming from the elite is on an average American. I really can't relate to that, so that's why I would be foolish to make a strong prediction. If it happens, it's going to take some time. But what are the reasons that one of the reasons that there's justification to be afraid is we are now, at least in the second generation of children and young adults, have been taught how not to think, but to feel your way through life.
What was it about communism? Did you actually believe the utopia?
To answer the question, I believed 1,000%. And there were some elements that contributed to my belief. So when I was launched to the United States, that belief was still intact. First of all is the brainwashing. And as you get a little older and you start thinking, communist ideology has a lot of romantic thinking in it. You know, everybody get along. We get rid of poverty. We get rid of the rulers. It's the ruling. The working class and the peasants will be ruling. Well, that never turned out that way. The ruling was delegated to a communist party. Okay, but even at the time, I understood the necessity that the party, somebody had to make the decision, and the workers and the peasants weren't really that smart enough for self-rule. Again, this is where my arrogance came in. I was going to be part of the ruling class and do good, mind you. What really sealed the deal for me was in our junior year, every high school class had to visit a concentration camp. Now, we knew that would not be a pleasant visit, but unpleasant is an understatement. So as we walked through the entrance door, we get to in the exhibition hall, there was a rotunda, was all around, and you've seen pictures like that. Piles of corpses, people totally emaciated. The most horrifying exhibit was on a table. There were two of them, actually three. Two shrunken heads that were encased in glass. They were decorations. They were like shrunken heads. They were heads of people that were killed, and then the heads were shrunk as a decoration on somebody's desk. And then a couple of lamps with lampshades that had interesting tattoos on them. They were made out of human skin. And we were told that the wife of the commandant had commissioned that skin, and so she would look at incoming prisoners and would pick out the people with the nicest tattoos and told them this one, that one, that one, so they were killed and skinned. And another room where they pretended to measure incoming prisoners that were actually scheduled to be executed right on the spot. So they had a slat there where they put the end on the head and the beginning was at the bottom. And based on the height, a hole opened in the back wall, and somebody shot the person in the neck. One of the victims was a fellow named Ernst Thälmann. Thälmann was the head of the Communist Party, He was moved to Buchenwald and executed that way. Now, it's a historic truth that until the Nazis took over, there were two radical elements in German society. It was the Nazis and it was the communists. And the communists and the Nazis fought. And the only force that fought the Nazis in the streets, the brown shirts, were the communists. You know what the impression that this made on us? You're 17 years old, 16, 17. And you see all this horror. You just want to forget it. It made such a huge emotional impression on us. The girls cried, and the rest of us went very quiet. And then when we were back home, we were instructed in the classroom about the Nazis that were in West German government. And there were some. We were the heirs of Thälmann, who was killed by the Nazis and who fought the Nazis. And over there's Nazis in the West German government supported by the United States. So clearly we were on the right side of history. There was no more doubt in my mind that I was doing the right thing. I was lucky enough to find out the truth after the wall came down by doing research, slowly but surely research about what went on there. How come, I was very much surprised that the wall came down. Nobody knew it was coming. Not the CIA, not the KGB, not the Stasi, and certainly not me. So I did research, and at that time, you didn't have to go to the library. You could go on the internet. And I found things like original unredacted works by Vladimir Lenin, who was the head of the communist revolution, the October Revolution in Russia. And he was my hero. I mean, he was my God, because he sacrificed his health and eventually his life to help, construct the paradise on earth for the working class. Well, and then I read something that blew my mind. And we did not get to read the original Lenin, and it said something about when he won the revolution and took power, he had to use violence to maintain power. And he invented something called the Red Terror. And the Red Terror meant to just eliminate all the enemies of the revolution. And the enemies of the revolution were also peasants, farmers who were wealthy. They're called kulaks. And they had big parcels of land, and they were supposed to eventually be collectivized, which Stalin did forcibly. But there was a passage in Lenin that indicated to me that Lenin was just as murderous a bastard as Stalin was. He just didn't have as many people at his disposal to do the killing. But the passage stated, you need to kill about 100 kulaks. You string them up, hanging by the trees on the side of the road, so everybody knows that if you own too much stuff, that's not very healthy to you, not very beneficial to your health and your life. That pretty much took the blinders off of me.
In a village, there was a certain quota of kulaks that should be taken away. And if you happen to be in a very poor village, someone has only one cow, you happen to have 2 cows, or you happen to have just 1 cow, but everyone else has 0, that's tough luck for you, right? This kulaking this is important for today as well, because kulaking is going on, I personally believe, in the radical left. So what I'm trying to say is that as we progress and we become less and less discriminatory, we become less racist as a society, right? We respect everyone. Well, somebody has to be a racist still. So now you can you can say something that a little while ago wouldn't be seen as racist, but now when you say it, it's racist, because in order for racism to exist, there has to be some proof that there is racism. So it's essentially radical left kulaking going on. You are racist because you said that. Well, Where can people find you?
Well, my website is this is jackbarsky.com. Very simple, one word, JACKBARSKY.com. And if you Google my name, you'll find tons and tons of entries on social media. Also, there's a lot of YouTube videos. Again, if you search just by my name, you'll find a whole bunch of interviews that I've given, and starting with the 60 Minutes, Lex Friedman, Jordan Peterson, and so forth. And I will become a lot more active on social media when I roll out my new project, which fundamentally, to give you a very, very brief idea what it's going to be all about. And I'm going to try to build a community of followers via social media. And then I will interact with that community, like sharing with younger people. Focuses more or less on young men, but not exclusive. The things I learned in life, in a life that was incredibly complicated, two identities, espionage, but a really, really successful career in corporate America. I'm now on my 6th career, not job, career, and also share things like that I learned from my own mistakes, such as if I could advise my 2 years younger self, I would still be married. I figured that out. Because now that I'm quote unquote single, I have just time like you do to analyze self, to go back and say, what did I do that? What did I do wrong? And interact with really smart people like you that interview me. Every interview and this is one of the reasons I'd say no to I'd never say no to podcasts. There's always one question and I say, wait a minute, I haven't thought about this. You asked a lot of them. So, so that's where I'm going to be active. And eventually I'm hoping to also organize in-person events, such as the one that seems to be just materializing when Chelsea told me yesterday that somebody reached out to her if we could both appear at an event for his company. So, that's the future. And, if you're on social media, you will have a hard time not to be molested by me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on this podcast.